Welcome, everyone, to the University of Rochester Women's Network, Your Vote, Your Voice, Understanding California's 2024 State Ballot. I'm Shaughnessy Duso, class of 2004. I just celebrated my 20th reunion in Rochester just a couple weeks ago. I'm part of the Bay Area Women's Group, as well as the Network Leader Council here in San Francisco.
About vote.
Um, thank you for joining us. I know everyone's very busy, so I appreciate the enthusiasm on this Thursday evening. As you all know, elections are a critical part of our democracy. And as most of you are well aware, California is quite unique. And I know the ballots can be quite daunting. I don't know about you, but I got my 4-page ballot in the mail on Friday. So we wanted to host another session like we did a few years back in 2020 to go through the California props. With that, I'm going to introduce Michelle Moritz. She is co-VP Voter Service and Speakers Bureau Chair from the League of Women's Voter here in San Francisco. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to her to take us through the California props.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for joining us for the Ballot Initiative Forum. Just one quick slide about who we are. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political nonprofit that encourages informed and active government participation in voting. And we sometimes do advocate for public policy after thorough study that we believe benefits the community. We never support or oppose political candidates or parties. And despite our historic name, all genders are welcome in our organization, and we're celebrating our 104th anniversary. So jumping right into the California ballot, we have 10 propositions statewide. And if there are questions about the local San Francisco ballot measures at the end, if there's time, I can try to answer some of those for San Francisco voters. But we'll just do the California props right now, because I know there are people from all over the place, it sounds like, all over California. Okay, so the first one is Prop 2, which is a bond measure to fund transitional kindergarten through community college public education facilities. And it would provide $8.5 billion for K-12 and $1.5 billion for community college facilities for the items listed below, such as renovation and replacement of old school buildings, construction of transitional kindergarten, career and technical education facilities, remediation of lead in the water used for drinking and food service, seismic health and safety mitigation, broadband internet service, and it would also provide interim housing for schools and administrative offices that have been impacted by natural disasters. It also would increase the allowed bonds from $5 million to $15 million while preserving eligibility for financial hardship assistance. And this would take effect right away in the, in a year in the 2026 to 27 fiscal year. This was placed on the ballot by the state legislature. The bill was AB 247. And since it's a bond measure, it would require a 2/3 majority to pass. Okay, so the supporters of this bond measure are claiming that this would address the most urgent needs of K-12 schools and community colleges. And schools currently lack funding to make basic structural repairs that are critical to providing safe environments for students to achieve their highest potential. The opponents are saying that the state should include school repairs in its regular budget and not burden taxpayers with these costs. They also think that the sliding scale for matching funds from the state should be wider, so low-income districts would receive a greater share. Are there any questions on Prop 2? Okay, moving on to Prop 3. This would repeal Prop 8 of 2008 that defined marriage as between a man and a woman and has been written into our state constitution. Instead, Prop 3 would remove that language from the California state constitution, which is vestigial and unenforceable, and would enshrine gay marriage as a fundamental right. The current way the Constitution of California reads is only marriage between a man and a woman is valid or recognized in California. And now the right to marry is guaranteed by federal law. So this prop was placed on the ballot by state legislators Scott Wiener and Evan Low and the LGBTQ caucus in order to enshrine this fundamental right in the California Constitution. So the supporters are saying, so a quote from Governor Gavin Newsom is that same-sex marriage is the law of the land and Prop 8 has no place in our Constitution. It's time that our laws affirm marriage equality, regardless of who you are or who you love. And California stands with the LGBTQ plus community and their right to live freely. And Evan Low, the co-sponsor, says these protections will protect against any future attempts to restrict marriage rights for same-sex and interracial couples. The opponents include an alliance of Baptist ministers and churches and the California Family Council President Jonathan Keller. And they believe that marriage is defined as a union between a man and a woman, and this is instituted by God, and it would eliminate safeguards against child marriages, incest, and polygamy. Moving on to Prop 4, this is another bond measure, and it would authorize a general obligation bond of $10 billion to finance projects for safe drinking water, drought, flood, and water resilience, wildfire and forest resilience, coastal resilience, extreme heat mitigation, biodiversity and nature-based climate solutions, climate-smart, sustainable, resilient farms and ranches, the creation of parks and outdoor access, and clean air programs. It was placed on the ballot by the state legislature, and it requires 2/3 majority of legislators and voters' approval to pass. So the supporters are saying that, in particular, the California Environmental Defense Fund is saying we need to be not only helping communities adapt to climate change right now, but we also need to be reducing our climate pollution. This is not a problem that can wait until it's convenient to fund in the budget. The opponents are mainly the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, which says that these bonds will be paid by people decades from now that didn't even get to vote for their authorization, and bonds are the most expensive way to pay for things. Moving on to Prop 5, this would affect the voter threshold for passing public infrastructure and housing bonds. So it would reduce the number of votes of approval needed to pass this kind of bond from 66% to 55%. And it would require making 4 amendments to the state constitution. So the existing law prohibits the ad valorem tax rate on real property to exceed 1% with certain exceptions. Prop 5 would add an additional exception allowing tax for public infrastructure, affordable housing with 55% voter approval, including in special districts, cities, and counties with accountability conditions. And it would apply to 2024 projects that are on the ballot to facilitate housing development in Northern California. It would not apply to most single-family homes. And this was placed on the ballot by the state legislature, led by Assembly Member Cecilia Aguiar Curry. The pros and cons of this one, the supporters are claiming that it would create parity between school districts and cities, counties, and special districts so that all local governments would have a variable financing tool to address their community's needs. It includes transparency and accountability measures, including an expenditure plan of projects, audits, and monitoring by a citizens commission to assure that the resources are spent as proposed. The opponents claim that this sharply lowers Prop 13's 2/3 voter threshold to 55% for local special taxes to fund infrastructure that is so vaguely defined that virtually anything could qualify. And the opponents also believe this opens the door to massive new tax hikes on property taxpayers. Going on to Prop 6, this would limit forced labor in state prisons. And this one was put on the ballot by the state legislature with recommendations from the California Black Legislative Caucus and the Reparations Committee that has been looking for ways to make reparations happen in California. It would remove language in the California Constitution that makes an exception to the prohibition of involuntary servitude for those being punished for a crime. So right now, our state constitution says slavery is prohibited, involuntary servitude is prohibited, except to punish a crime. And so right now, of course, in our prisons, most prisoners are required to work and they're paid very little, if anything, and they are not allowed to refuse to work. So this Prop 6 would require the development of voluntary paid work programs for inmates by the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, and the wages and work requirements would be set by local ordinance. The supporters are saying that requiring incarcerated people to work, often for very low pay, is a form of slavery. They claim that it prioritizes rehabilitation for incarcerated people, allows them to continue their education, use the law library, get counseling, and participate in other rehabilitative programs that facilitate growth and transformation. The opponents claim that there was no official opposing ballot argument, but some Republican legislators voted against it, reflecting opposition to reparations when they believe that the budget deficit is a top priority. And they also argue that a work system, mandatory work system, promotes order in the prisons. Okay, the next prop is 32, and it raises minimum wage to $18 per hour. It would first increase it to $17 per hour for the remainder of 2024, and then increase to $18 per hour in 2025 for businesses with greater than 26 employees. In 2025, smaller businesses, less than 25 employees, would pay $17 an hour, and then in 2026, they would need to bump it up to 18. Thereafter, the wage will annually adjust for inflation, and in periods of economic downturns or general fund deficit, the governor may suspend the annual increase up to 2 times. This was placed on the ballot by initiative statute led by startup investor turned anti-poverty advocate Joe Sandberg. So the supporters are saying that people deserve a living wage. Wages have not risen commensurately with the cost of living. And if families could afford basic needs, they would be less reliant on taxpayer-funded relief. The opponents are saying that markets, not politicians, should set the minimum wage. They argue that businesses are still struggling to recover from the pandemic and they can't afford these raises.
Michelle, could you comment a little bit more on the supporters? Because on the ballot, it says none submitted, if I'm reading it correctly.
Yeah, so there was no official, wait, repeat the question, please.
So I was just curious about, so on the prop itself, it says supporters none submitted, but I'm curious about the supporters that we're talking about here.
Oh, so there must not have been an official paid support position for it, if you're reading that on the ballot. But there are many labor unions, workers associations, and then this guy who got it on the ballot, Joel Sandberg, who are supporting it. And unfortunately, I can't see my notes because of the way
No
the way
worries.
I'm presenting this. So I can look it up at the end and see if there's more information about that.
Yeah, I would just be curious. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, now moving on to Prop 33. This would expand local government's authority to enact rent control on residential property. It would repeal the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act of 1995, which prevents cities and counties from limiting the initial rental rate charged by landlords in all types of housing and rental rates for existing tenants in housing constructed after February 1st, 1995. This is the third time that we voted on a similar measure, and the other two failed. And Prop 33 would allow cities and counties to maintain, enact, or expand residential rent control ordinances. So this was placed on the ballot by initiative statute sponsored by the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. So the supporters are saying more affordable housing is needed for low-income and disabled people to prevent homelessness. Prop 33 would help to keep housing affordable. And I read that in California, 44% of the residents are renters, so it affects a lot of people. We're second only in the number of renters to New York. New York is the first. And the supporters also argue that new teachers, firefighters, and police are paying half their income in rent in major cities, and they cannot afford to live where they work. The opponents are saying that rental housing providers should be able to adjust rents to market rates to avoid property deterioration and the lack of investment in housing. They claim that this rent control disincentivizes the construction of new housing, which we need throughout the state. Okay, Prop 34 is an odd prop because it's basically targeting a single entity, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, because that is the only entity in California that meets all the criteria of this prop. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, but it would basically require, it restricts spending by healthcare providers meeting certain criteria to use prescription drug revenue for patients. It would require that these healthcare providers spend 98% of revenues from federal discount prescription drug programs on direct patient care. It would apply only to providers that spent over $100 million over 10 years on anything other than direct patient care and operated multifamily housing with over 500 high-severity health and safety violations. It would penalize noncompliance by revoking healthcare licenses and tax-exempt status, and it would permanently authorize the state to negotiate Medi-Cal drug prices on a statewide basis. And this was put on the ballot by initiative statute backed by the California Apartment Association, which is a property owner or landlord association. And there's, just to give you a little history, there's been a longstanding feud between this Apartment Association and the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, because the AIDS Healthcare Foundation has been buying up a lot of property using the profits from these discounted drugs to buy that property, and then they rent it out to low-income housing. So the supporters are claiming that this forces the worst abusers of the drug discount program to provide health care to low-income patients, the original goal of the program, and it institutes accountability measures to ensure taxpayer dollars are spent as intended. The opponents are saying this would actually increase costs to state government by millions of dollars annually to review entities' compliance. And it's a deceptive measure designed to eliminate rent control, ensuring greater profits for the California Apartment Association's landlords, and it will very likely be challenged in court due to it illegally targeting a single entity, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. Next is Prop 35, which would provide permanent funding for Medi-Cal healthcare services. It would make permanent the existing tax on managed healthcare insurance plans, which is set to expire in 2026, and it provides healthcare services to Medi-Cal recipients. It would require revenues to be used only for primary, specialty, emergency care, family planning, mental health, and prescription drugs. It would prohibit revenues from diversion to other California budget needs. So it's basically protecting this revenue for these specific purposes in healthcare. And it would cap administrative expenses. It requires independent audits of programs receiving funding. It was placed on the ballot by initiative statute led by a coalition of doctors, hospitals, and clinics. The supporters claim that this would protect $6.7 billion that is earmarked for increased payments to healthcare providers that the governor wants to divert to cover the state budget deficit. It encourages healthcare providers to take more Medi-Cal patients. And as you may know, because of the low reimbursement that healthcare providers get for taking Medi-Cal patients, many of them no longer will see those patients. And this measure is backed by nearly all healthcare providers and both the California Democratic and Republican parties. There's no official opposing argument for this one, but Governor Newsom does not like it, arguing that restricting how tax revenue is spent hamstrings future legislators' ability to balance the budget. Okay, Prop 36. Imagine you've all heard about it. It's a much talked about one right now. It would increase certain drug and theft penalties and mandate treatment. It would amend Prop 47, which we voted on back in 2014 and was aimed at reducing the prison population in California. In Prop 47, criminal offenders who committed certain non-serious and non-violent drug and property crimes were sentenced to reduced penalties and had shorter jail terms. And these crimes were classified as misdemeanors. But so Prop 36 would amend that to allow felony charges and increase sentences for those with 2 prior drug or theft convictions who possess certain drugs, including fentanyl, heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamine, and for thefts under $950, which are both current misdemeanors. And although it also would provide for defendants who plead guilty to felony drug possession and enter treatment, they may have charges dismissed if they complete the treatment and no longer sell drugs. This was placed on the ballot by initiative statute. The supporters say that this is going to prevent homelessness and reduce drug addiction, by mandating treatment. The costs of the program of the additional prison population might be mitigated by decreased expenditure on mental health and drug treatment programs and victim services. The opponents claim that this increases criminal justice system costs by hundreds of millions of dollars annually due to increased prison population and court-related workload. Also, they argue that no studies on criminal justice or homelessness support the idea that harsher punishment prevents crime or homelessness.
Michelle, can you explain what initiative statute means?
Oh, that means that signatures were gathered to get this on the ballot.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So some of the things we vote on are put on the ballot by politicians, and others are put there by organizations that manage to gather the required number of signatures to get it on the ballot. Okay, so that actually is all of the state props. So if there are any further questions, I'm happy to take them now.
None came through the chat, but yeah, if anyone's got any questions, please speak up.
Okay, I'll proceed then to my final slides here. The Department of Elections has asked us to share a little primer about understanding ranked choice voting, because California candidate elections in California have used this to save money and avoid runoffs since 2004. And so you may be faced with this on your ballot for the candidate races. It only comes into play if no candidate gets greater than 50% of the vote. And just some things to know: on the right-hand side here, you can see a sample ballot, and you'll see, the columns with bubbles where you can rank your choices. So you never want to put more than one choice in a single column, or that will invalidate your vote. You also never want to make the same choice in multiple columns. So if you really like broccoli, you don't want to put that all the way across, because only your first choice will be counted. It's not going to be 5 votes for broccoli. And you never want to put a candidate on there that you never want to rank a candidate that you would not like to see in office. So if there's anyone you can't stand, do not rank them. Also, you don't have to fill a bubble in each column. If there are only 3 candidates you want, you just fill in the first 3 and leave 4 and 5 blank. And finally, in the last row, you can write in a candidate and rank that candidate if you wish. And
Michelle, there was a question that came through on Prop 36.
Okay.
And the question is Prop 36 undoing a previous ballot prop? And based on my notes, yes, it was, right? Amend.
Yes. So it would amend Prop 47. And I'm not sure if I said, but the history of Prop 47, which reduced the these crimes to misdemeanors, was in response to a Supreme Court ruling that said that California was meting out cruel and unusual punishment because our prisons were so overcrowded. So this prop was aimed at reducing the prison population. And then the proponents of Prop 36 are saying that having reduced these crimes to misdemeanors has led to a lot of drug problems with drugs and these snatch and grab robberies where people run into stores and steal merchandise that is worth less than $950. Does that answer the question.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay, any questions about ranked choice voting? I guess what I didn't say is then with rank, if no candidate gets 50% of the vote, greater than 50% of the vote, then they eliminate the person who got the least number of votes, and then they go to the second, third, and fourth choices of everyone and recount all the votes until someone gets greater than 50%. And some of the key dates, you should have already received your mail-in ballot this week. If you didn't, you should contact your Department of Elections in your county. And the last day to register to vote and receive a mail-in ballot is October 21st. But of course, you can't, in California, you can also even go and register and vote on election day, but it would be a conditional registration. So they would have to verify that you are who you say you are before counting your vote. November 5th is the last day for the postmark. And this applies to the other information I have here applies to San Francisco's early voting, but I'm sure counties all over the state have early voting as well. And don't forget to seal, sign, and date your mail-in ballot. And finally, if you go to the League of Women Voters, either of San Francisco, if you live in San Francisco, or California, you can find a lot more voter resources, pro-con guides, ballot recommendations that our advocacy committees vote on and post. And yeah, all kinds of answers to your questions. And there's also a league-sponsored website called Vote 411, all one word. And that has a lot of voter information also, as well as places to link you to register to vote online. And finally, I already learned before we started that some of you are serving as poll workers. That's awesome because there's always a shortage of them. And so I encourage anybody who wants to take a day off and do that to help all of us voters by doing so. So I'll stop sharing my screen.
Seems like
And
Michelle, a couple questions are coming through on
Okay.
on the chat, so I'll just try to go through them one at a time. The first one, I've heard arguments that it's better to vote no on ballot props in general. Can you comment on the pros cons of ballot props since we're circumventing our legislators?
I have heard people use that strategy. You mean on bond? Are you talking about bond measures or any?
It says ballot
All of
props,
them.
but Lori, I don't know if you want to elaborate.
I've just heard that argument for all ballot props.
I guess I would argue that it's important to educate yourself about all the ballot measures and really dig in and decide what it all means and try to vote your conscience. If you really feel, I would say you should only vote no if you feel that it's something that shouldn't pass according to your values and conscience. So yeah, or if you really don't feel strongly one way or another, I guess you could not vote on that measure at all.
That help, Lori?
Thank you.
We have another question, which I know I can answer, but if you vote by mail on November 5th, will my vote be counted no matter what, or only if the vote is close? It's going to be counted, Joanne.
As long as it's postmarked.
Yep.
So if you're going to mail it on November 5th, I would not put it in a mailbox. I would take it to the post office and make sure it gets postmarked, because you never know if they're gonna, the post office is gonna empty that mailbox that day, and if it's actually gonna get postmarked. So if you're doing that on election day, oh, and you can also turn it in at a polling place
Yeah.
or a ballot drop box. Yeah.
Yeah, all the polling locations, as Michelle mentioned, I'm working as a poll worker. I just did my training today. There are going to be red boxes, at least in San Francisco County, that will collect all the ballots. Just make sure it's signed and sealed and drop it off.
Yeah. And if you happen to damage your ballot or make a mistake, you can go to your county Department of Elections and get a replacement ballot, or even just vote in person.
Lots of options.
Yeah.
Another question's come through. Are there any props where voting yes actually means you're saying no because of the language used? I'll let the expert answer, but yes.
Yeah, it can be confusing that way sometimes. I can't think of any that this time that are extremely confusing that way. Yeah, good question.
Yeah, you have to just, see who's supporting it, read the language. Some of them do try to trick you up, I think.
Carmen says, that's why your slides are so helpful. So thank you.
I worry they're just a wall of words, but these props are often so complicated, it's hard not to put all that in there.
If there are any more questions, you can still put in the chat or speak up. Final call. Great. Well, Sarah's been putting a lot of resources in the chat for you all. So click on those links. There will be a follow-up email with a lot of the information as well as this recording. Thank you all for spending your evening with us. I know these props are not easy to digest, so this is super helpful for my initial phase of learning. And I didn't get to share my shirt, but I have my read and vote shirt on. So there's a lot more reading I think that I still need to do, but this was super helpful. So thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Sarah. And yeah, make sure you get your ballots filled out and get your vote counted.
Oh, it looks like we have a last
Oh
minute.
yeah, we got another question. Okay, from Diego. Would voting yes for the prop that increasing funding for environmental cleanups, emergencies, indirectly give more funds to state for anti-hydrocarbon, anti-mining regulations? I can repeat that if you need me to.
I'm reading it. Yeah, I can.
Oh, great. Okay, you can see it. Great.
I don't know. In the things that I read, it didn't say anything about hydrocarbon and mining. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question. There's a really good resource called Hal Matters online that has nonpartisan, in-depth information about all of these props. So you might be able to delve into it there and find out.
If you're willing to read the booklet that was mailed out to you, that might have some information as well.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it does incentivize putting in things like electric vehicle charging stations and that sort of stuff, but I don't know about mining.
Great. Any other questions? We do have a few minutes left. I know it's getting late in the evening, so we can definitely call it. But if there are anything specific to San Francisco, we do have some of those slides as well. but there are additional recordings that you can access if you want to do that at another time.